Repsol Honda, Sepang 2015 wasn't just a race. It became one of the darkest soap operas MotoGP has ever staged. What should have been a straight title fight between Valentino Rossi and Jorge Lorenzo dissolved into a global scandal, and Honda were caught in the middle. The seeds were sown a week earlier in Australia. Rossi had accused Marc Marquez of playing games, suggesting the young Spaniard had deliberately interfered to help Lorenzo. It sounded like paranoia, until Sepang. From the moment the lights went out, Marquez and Rossi locked into a duel that felt less like racing and more like personal warfare. They overtook each other aggressively, sometimes 3 times in a single corner. The moves were beyond ruthless. It looked like they were trying to humiliate each other rather than win. Cameras zoomed in as Marquez leaned on Rossi's Yamaha, refusing to give an inch. Rossi, visibly furious, gestured mid-race, shaking his head at the antics. Then came turn 14. Rossi ran Marquez wide, deliberately slowing to force him toward the edge of the track. Marquez leaned in, their helmets almost touching. And then, the infamous moment. Marquez went down. Rossi continued. The world exploded. From one camera angle, it looked like Rossi had lashed out with his leg, kicking Marquez's brake lever. From another, it looked like Marquez had leaned in and tangled himself. Social media turned into a battlefield. Honda immediately backed Marquez, saying Rossi had committed a deliberate foul. Rossi's fans swore it was Marquez provoking him. The FM convened that very night. After hours of video replays and heated arguments, they punished Rossi with 3 penalty points. Combined with earlier infractions, it meant he would start the final race at Valencia from the very back of the grid. In effect, the title was over. Lorenzo won the championship, but the story everyone remembered was Sepang. The scandal never healed. To this day, fans are split. Did Rossi kick, or did Marquez play actor? What is certain is that Honda's golden boy was at the center of a controversy that shattered reputations, fractured friendships, and poisoned a season. For many, Sepang 2015 remains the most infamous race in MotoGP history, the moment where sporting rivalry turned into outright scandal. Gresini racing Ducati. No MotoGP controversy is as painful as the one tied to Gresini's history. The tragedy of Marco Simoncelli at Sepang 2011. Simoncelli wasn't just another rider. He was one of the sport's brightest stars, a flamboyant talent with wild hair, wild style, and a fearless attitude that made him adored by fans. But his aggressive riding had always drawn criticism. Rivals accused him of being reckless, of pushing beyond safe limits. Race direction had already warned him multiple times that season. By the time the paddock arrived in Malaysia, Simoncelli was both loved and controversial. On race day, lap 2, disaster struck. At turn 11, Simoncelli lost the front of his Gresini Honda, but refused to let go. Fighting to save the bike, he clung on, his machine veering back across the racing line. Behind him came Valentino Rossi and Colin Edwards, with no chance to avoid impact. Both struck Simoncelli, tearing his helmet off in the collision. The scene was horrific. The race was red-flagged. But within an hour, the official announcement came. Marco Simoncelli had died. MotoGP had lost one of its most charismatic figures at just 24. The controversy wasn't just about the accident. It was about the debates that followed. Some fans said Simoncelli's death was an unavoidable freak crash. Others pointed to his aggressive style and asked if MotoGP's tolerance for his antics had contributed to the tragedy. Questions were raised about stewarding. Had they been too lenient in earlier races, allowing dangerous patterns to continue? Even the safety of helmets became a talking point, as his had come off on impact. For Gresini Racing, it was more than a scandal. It was a scar. The team, already carrying the memory of losing Daijiro Kato in 2003, was again plunged into grief. They were at the center of MotoGP's darkest day in decades, forever tied to a moment where racing's risk and controversy collided in the most brutal way possible. Monster Energy Yamaha. If Honda's nightmare was Sepang 2015, Yamaha's came 5 years later. A controversy not born on track, but in the shadows of engineering. The 2020 season was already strange, compressed by COVID-19, with a wild calendar and unpredictable results. But Yamaha made it worse by stumbling into a scandal that stripped away their credibility. It began with reliability issues. At Jerez, Fabio Quartararo and Maverick Viñales complained of mysterious engine failures. Yamaha's engineers traced it back to the valves. The original supplier had delivered parts that didn't meet spec, raising the risk of catastrophic blowouts at high RPMs. The solution? competition quietly swapped to a new supplier mid-season. But MotoGP rules are brutal about engines. Once the season starts, you can't change internal parts without unanimous agreement from the MSMA, the Manufacturers Association. Yamaha didn't wait. They went ahead and installed new valves, bypassing proper approval. When rival factories found out, chaos erupted. Honda, Ducati, and Suzuki demanded sanctions. The FIM investigated, and Yamaha's secret came out. The verdict was damning. Yamaha had violated homologation rules. The penalty stripped them of 50 constructors' points and also docked the team's championship tallies, while the riders, Quartararo, Viñales, Rossi, and Morbidelli, were allowed to keep their individual points. The team's reputation was wrecked. The scandal hit hardest because Yamaha had momentum. Quartararo looked like a future champion, winning the opening races. Morbidelli later took 2 brilliant victories, but the engine penalties turned their campaign sour. Critics accused Yamaha of arrogance, sneaking rule changes in the hope no one would notice. Inside the garage, morale dropped. Rossi endured one of his worst seasons with multiple DNFs and even a mid-season COVID infection. Viñales slammed Yamaha for not telling the truth. Quartararo lost form completely under the pressure. By the end of 2020, Yamaha's season was remembered not for wins, but for scandal. The engine valve affair painted them as reckless cheats, willing to break rules to cover their own engineering failures. For a factory once considered the clean, elegant face of MotoGP, 2020 was brutal. A year defined not by glory, but by shame. Ducati Lenovo, Qatar, 2019 should have been remembered for Andrea Dovizioso's breathtaking duel with Marc Marquez, a last-lap showdown decided by inches. Instead, the post-race days were dominated by one word: Spoilergate. On Dovizioso's bike, eagle-eyed rivals noticed a strange aerodynamic device bolted to the swing arm. At first glance, it looked like a simple rain deflector, a piece of metal designed to channel water spray away from the rear tire. But there was no rain in Qatar. Ducati's rival smelled something else: an illegal aero trick. Honda, Suzuki, KTM, and Aprilia immediately filed protests. They argued that Ducati's spoon wasn't about rain at all, but a hidden downforce device designed to push the rear tire harder into the ground, giving more grip and better tire life. If true, it was a game changer. The stewards were overwhelmed. Nobody could agree if it was legal. The initial ruling cleared Ducati, but the protests escalated to the MotoGP Court of Appeal. For weeks, Ducati's reputation hung in limbo. Was this innovation genius engineering or outright cheating? Dovizioso's victory in Qatar was almost stripped from the record books. In the end, the court sided with Ducati. The device was deemed legal, but the damage was done. Rivals painted Ducati as masters of rule bending, stretching every technical gray area until it snapped. The controversy defined their 2019 campaign more than any podium. Every time a Ducati overtook on the straights that year, whispers followed: "It's the spoiler." For Ducati, Spoilergate wasn't just about one part. It reinforced their reputation as MotoGP's most politically aggressive factory, willing to test the rulebook's limits as ruthlessly as they tested their bikes. Aprilia Racing. Aprilia had finally clawed their way back into relevance by 2019. With Andrea Iannone, a proven race winner, they hoped to shake off the years of backmarker shame. Instead, they were dragged into MotoGP's ugliest scandal: doping. In late 2019, during routine FIM testing, Iannone tested positive for drostanolone, an anabolic steroid. The news broke like a bombshell. MotoGP had never dealt with a high-profile rider being caught for performance-enhancing drugs. Fans were stunned. Iannone immediately protested his innocence, claiming contaminated meat during a trip to Asia had caused the positive result. But the court wasn't convinced. After months of legal wrangling, appeals, and expert testimony, the ruling came down. Iannone was banned for 4 years. For a rider already in his late 20s, it was a career-ending punishment. Aprilia were left blindsided, forced to scramble for replacements. The garage atmosphere collapsed. Engineers who had spent years rebuilding their projects suddenly had no lead rider. The scandal was devastating for Aprilia's image. While other factories fought over aerodynamics and electronics, Aprilia were in the headlines for doping, a word that belongs to cycling and athletics, not MotoGP. Rivals mocked them. Fans questioned the factory's professionalism. And Iannone himself was cast as the sport's first modern pariah. The brutality of the controversy wasn't just the ban itself. It was the shame. Aprilia, already struggling to be taken seriously, became defined by one of MotoGP's most disgraceful episodes. Even now, years later, when Aprilia are finally competitive, the shadow shadow of Iannone's doping scandal lingers. Red Bull KTM. KTM's rise in MotoGP was supposed to be fast. They had conquered Moto3 and Moto2, and with factory backing, the premier class was the next step. But in 2019, that dream collided head-on with Johann Zarco, signed as their star rider. Zarco was expected to lead KTM's charge. Instead, the marriage fell apart almost immediately. The RC16 was brutally physical, with its stiff steel frame and aggressive power delivery. Zarco hated it. Unlike Paul Espargaro, who muscled the bike into results, Zarco looked helpless. His flowing corner speed style was destroyed. By mid-season, frustration boiled over. Zarco wasn't just struggling, he was openly miserable. In interviews, he said the bike was unrideable, that he couldn't adapt, that he had lost confidence in himself. For a factory pouring millions into development, it was a public humiliation. KTM had given Zarco a 2-year contract, but by August, he walked into their office and quit. Mid-season, the fallout was explosive. It's rare in MotoGP for a rider to abandon a factory contract. Rarer still to do it so publicly. KTM scrambled to save face, cycling through replacements and giving test riders unexpected races. Zarco himself was left in limbo. His career temporarily derailed. The scandal wasn't just about poor results. It was about the public divorce. A factory that prided itself on ready to race had been rejected by its own star rider. It painted KTM as a brutal, unforgiving project and raised questions about whether their unique steel frame philosophy could ever work in MotoGP. Though KTM eventually recovered, the Zarco breakup remains one of the ugliest controversies in modern MotoGP history. LCR Honda. In 2019, LCR Honda's entire season revolved around one man's frustration, Cal Crutchlow. Known for his honesty and sharp tongue, Crutchlow had always been Honda's outspoken satellite rider. But in 2019, his relationship with HRC turned into open warfare. The problem was the bike. Honda's RC213V that year was built around Marc Marquez's style, a machine that demanded impossible front-end braking and acrobatic saves. Marquez thrived, winning relentlessly. Crutchlow, on the other hand, struggled to stay upright. He suffered multiple crashes, endured nagging injuries, and found himself further from the podium than he had been in years. Instead of keeping quiet, Crutchlow went public. He told journalists that Honda were guilty of arrogance, that they only cared about Marquez, and had built a bike no one else could ride. He accused HRC of ignoring his feedback, of leaving LCR out of development, of treating him as disposable. For a satellite team dependent on factory support, these comments were dynamite. Honda's response was icy. They dismissed his claims and doubled down on Marquez as their golden child. Inside the paddock, the rift became gossip fodder. Was Crutchlow burning bridges, or simply telling the truth everyone else was too scared to admit? For LCR, the controversy was brutal. Their star rider was publicly at war with the factory that supplied their bikes. Sponsors squirmed, results slumped, and the garage was split between loyalty to their rider and fear of angering Honda. By season's end, the fallout was clear. Crutchlow's standing in Honda politics weakened permanently, and LCR's influence inside the factory paddock shrank. The 2019 rift left scars, remembered as the season where Honda's satellite openly rebelled against its master. VR46 Ducati, Valentino Rossi's VR46 team, entered MotoGP with massive fanfare. A Ducati-backed satellite squad carrying Rossi's name, it was destined to be a fan favorite. But by 2023, the honeymoon had turned into political warfare between its own riders, Marco Bezzecchi and Luca Marini. Bezzecchi was the breakout star, a podium regular, and even a dark horse title contender. Marini, Rossi's half-brother, was consistent but less spectacular. As the season wore on, Ducati began weighing its options. Which VR46 rider would get stronger backing, and who might be sacrificed in the shuffle of satellite contracts? Rumors exploded mid-season of backroom deals, with Bezzecchi allegedly courted by Pramac and Marini lobbying hard to retain his seat under VR46's banner. At Misano, cameras caught tense body language in the garage. Mechanics split into camps. Bezzecchi wanted assurance he'd remain the team's future leader. Marini, protected by family ties to Rossi, wasn't going quietly. Speculation ran wild as Ducati weighed who to back long-term. Bezzecchi was linked with a Pramac seat, while Marini, Rossi's half-brother, worked to secure his own future. Though not explosive in public, the paddock gossip was relentless, fueling talk of favoritism and pressure behind the scenes. The contract saga dominated headlines through late 2023. What should have been a fairy tale season of VR46 success instead became a story of nepotism, favoritism, and betrayal. For a team born with Rossi's legendary spirit of racing freedom, the 2023 controversy revealed that even they weren't immune to MotoGP's ugliest politics. Trackhouse Aprilia. Trackhouse entered MotoGP in 2024 with a burst of American flair. Backed by NASCAR team owner Justin Marks and fronted by a bold marketing push, they promised to bring the U.S. back into MotoGP. The paddock was intrigued. Finally, a serious American entry after years of absence. But almost immediately, controversy followed. Trackhouse's entry in 2024 was unusual. An American NASCAR-rooted team joining MotoGP through Aprilia's satellite program. While most welcomed the U.S. return, some skeptics wondered if the project was more about marketing flair than racing substance. Their glossy launch was heavy on branding and celebrity attention, which drew some criticism that style was being put ahead of proven MotoGP results. Journalists began asking uncomfortable questions. Was Trackhouse financially solid, or were they scrambling behind the scenes? The controversy grew when some riders and managers criticized the team's commercial focus. Glossy promos and celebrity branding dominated their launch, while details about their technical program with Aprilia lagged behind. Hardcore fans sneered that Trackhouse was a show team, prioritizing American exposure over racing substance. Though the project survived, 2024 left an asterisk by their name. Instead of being welcomed as MotoGP's fresh blood, Trackhouse became a lightning rod for debates about whether Dorna was selling grid slots to the highest bidder and whether MotoGP's identity was being compromised for marketing. For a debut meant to inspire, the controversy made sure Trackhouse's first year was remembered more for politics than performance. Gazga's Tech 3. Tech 3 had always been one of MotoGP's respected underdog teams, but in 2020, their reputation was dragged into the kind of politics that fans hate most: team orders. That year, Miguel Oliveira was proving himself as a star, delivering Tech 3's first ever MotoGP victory in Styria. It was a fairy tale, the tiny satellite team beating the factories, but the celebration didn't last. Within weeks, murmurs of friction appeared. Pit lane communication between Oliveira, teammate Iker Lecuona, and KTM's factory squad became messy. Rumors always swirl in MotoGP about satellite teams favoring factories, and some fans speculated about KTM's influence on Tech 3. But Oliveira's breakout wins stood on their own merit, silencing doubts about his equality inside the garage. The tension peaked when Oliveira publicly hinted he hadn't been given full equality, saying he won in spite of the situation, not because of it. Fans were furious. Team orders are MotoGP's dirtiest secret, rarely spoken aloud, but always suspected. To hear a writer call it out confirmed what many believed. Even in satellite teams, politics dictated who got opportunities. The pit lane row exposed cracks in KTM's united front. Tech 3, once the feel-good story of 2020, suddenly found themselves accused of favoritism and manipulation. For a satellite squad that had built its brand on fairness and grit, the 2020 controversy stained what should have been their proudest season. Pramac Ducati. Pramac Ducati's low point came in 2009, when their entire operation nearly collapsed under financial strain and rider turmoil. Sponsorship troubles plagued the team from the start. Logos appeared and disappeared across races as backers pulled out or demanded last-minute renegotiations. Behind the scenes, mechanics whispered that they weren't sure how long the budget would hold. On track, things were no better. Finnish rookie Mika Kallio was promoted mid-season to temporarily replace Casey Stoner in the factory squad, leaving Pramac scrambling to reshuffle riders. Substitute Aleix Espargaro was thrown into the mix, but results were inconsistent. Meanwhile, the factory pressure meant Pramac were often left with outdated parts, fielding bikes that lagged behind. Not just the works Ducatis, but also satellite Yamahas and Hondas. The real low point was constant instability. Sponsors coming and going, riders being shuffled mid-season, and mechanics stretched thin trying to keep outdated bikes competitive. Riders vented frustration, hinting at unsafe setups and a lack of resources to fix recurring problems. By the end of 2009, Pramac weren't just struggling on the track, they were fighting to survive as a MotoGP entity. The crisis became public knowledge, cementing that year as their darkest. A combination of funding chaos, political embarrassment, and race day controversy that made sponsors think twice about their future. For a Ducati satellite team expected to rise, 2009 was the season they nearly disappeared.